Okay, so we are going to start from the front and then work our way back. The front half of our brain, going from behind the forehead to about the middle of the top of your head, and then right in front of your ears, is in the right and left hemispheres. They're called the frontal lobes. Hence, they're in the front. The frontal lobes the frontal lobe has a couple of different responsibilities. The biggest thing, or the couple biggest things, are it is responsible for our abstract thought, planning, judgment, personality, all of these different things. The part of the frontal lobe that does all these things, what is called the prefrontal cortex, which is the very, very front of the brain. Humans is much, much more advanced than any other animals, because we can do all of these things. We can think about hypothetical situations. Other animals have personalities, but they don't have as distinctive personalities as we do. So the prefrontal cortex does all that. This part of the brain is the last part of the brain to be fully developed. For females, it's fully developed probably in the late teens. For men, it may not be until their late 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s, which explains why men, even in an older age, sometimes are not as good of decision makers, not as good of planners as women are. There's the motor cortex, which the next slide is going to cover more, which sits at the back, in the back portion of the frontal lobe. And then connected to the motor cortex, something that we'll talk about a little bit more later on. This is only in the left hemisphere. Okay, so on the left side of your brain is what is called Broca's area. Broca's area is responsible for the physical production of speech. So actually, literally, physically being able to speak, like me moving my tongue, moving my lips, so forth. So just a little bit more detail on the motor cortex. Again, a cortex is an area that is very, very specialized, and it's usually dealing with sensory or motor abilities. The left side of the motor cortex controls the right side of the body, and vice versa. Now, what they have done is they have mapped the motor cortex, and what they understand now is that different parts of the motor cortex control different parts of the body. And the larger the area that is taken up, the more control the brain has on that part of the body. The larger area in the motor cortex dedicated to that area of the body has more motor control. So you can see here, in our face, we have a lot of motor control over our face, but we don't have a whole lot of motor control over our elbow. We can really just move it one way or the other. How they figured this out was by going in and doing what's called brain mapping, where if they were doing brain surgery, they could go in with a little electrode. They could send a very, very light electric current into there. And let's say that they sent an electric current into the left hemisphere here that controls your hand. All right, if they sent it right here, all right, then they could get, then your right index finger might move, or would move, most likely. If it doesn't, then that means that there's a problem. So the motor cortex, all right, controls movement, sends out movement signals to the rest of the body. Now, moving to the top rear of our brain, what is called the parietal lobe. The main thing to remember about the parietal lobe is it has what is called the somatosensory cortex. Soma is body, sensory is touch. This is where we receive touch signals from the body. So just like the motor cortex, it is contralateralized. When we touch something with our right hand, it is perceived and processed in the left somatosensory cortex. And just like the motor cortex, areas of our body that are more sensitive, there is more area dedicated to those in the somatosensory cortex. So like our nose, which is very, very sensitive, has a large portion of the somatosensory cortex dedicated to it. All the rest of the parietal lobe is association area. This is the largest bit of association area in the brain. And again, association area is areas that deal with human thoughts, behaviors, perception, essentially just integrating all of the sensory and motor information that is coming in to essentially give us an understanding of the world. So here you see sort of a diagram of the somatosensory and the motor cortex. The reason that they're right next to each other is so let's say that I burn myself. That sensory signal is sent up here to the somatosensory cortex. Okay, and I burn my hip, I guess, somewhere around there. Somatosensory cortex, it goes through the thalamus. They're right next to each other so that these neurons can then easily communicate with these motor neurons to send a signal back down to the body, all right, telling them to pull your hand away, move your hip away, all right, whatever. So these two parts of the brain, even though they're in separate lobes, they communicate very, very easily with each other. This guy right here, it's called the motor sensory homunculi. It is a visual representation of how much of our body is dedicated to each thing. So you can see motor movement and sensation. You know, our hands have a lot of motor movement and they have a lot of sensation. Phantom limb. Phantom limb is an interesting phenomenon that's been observed with people who have lost a limb. People who have lost a limb will oftentimes still feel pain, usually pain. Sometimes it can be itching. Sometimes it can be any sort of touch sensation. They will feel pain. They will feel touch sensation coming from the limb that is no longer there. The reason for this is that area of the brain is still there, at least for a while it is, until it maybe gets taken over by another area, what's called plasticity. So if you have your arm amputated, all right, that part of the brain still exists. So if there are sensory signals coming in, some might transfer over to there. So you might actually feel something in a limb that doesn't exist anymore. I highly recommend you watch this video right here. It's very interesting. It's also, you know, a lot of the stuff we look at is just, you know, white guys. This video here is a brown person, and so highlighting some of the minorities that have contributed to psychology. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, it is very heavily just white guys. So, all right. Now the last two. This is a video right here showing them going in and putting stimulation into the sensory and motor cortex, and you'll see in this video what that does when they put a little electrical signal into the sensory area of the somatosensory cortex that is connected with the person's left hand. The person who is still conscious will say, "Oh, I'm feeling something in my left hand." Same thing with the motor. And then this video right here, very, very cool, showing how they have used robotics to essentially give people who have lost limbs or can't use their limbs anymore, they have been able to hook electrodes up to these areas of the brain to allow for them to feel things and to have movement in these areas that they no longer have. So this robotic hand is connected to that area of the brain, and this guy right here will be able to feel when the doctor here touches the robotic hand. He can also move it just by thinking about moving it. Okay. And there will be one more very, very quick video on the last two lobes.